Hello, hello, my friends. AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink. Welcome back to my face and my card making space, and a couple of rainbow sparkly birthday cards. I just had fun. My second set of the little picket fence pint-sized paper pouncers showed up. People have been asking me about these. I've already done a couple videos since they released the little ones. There's the original size that came out last year that I did a review on them. I've done many videos using them, and they're just pouncers. And I have two sets for my main pouncers. I have a set for oxides and pigment inks, and I have a set for dye inks because manufacturers and I myself recommend having separate, whether it's blending brushes or sponges, between those two types of inks, mainly because if you take tools that you use on like oxides or pigment inks, you can transfer those pigments into your dye ink pads and it over time can wreck them. That said, that is the recommendation. It's what I follow because I don't want to risk wrecking any of my tools. Something like the pouncers, you aren't supposed to wash them. Do not get them wet. You can just spray a paper towel, and wipe them a little bit. That's what I do if I'm going from like a darker color to a lighter color, in the same type of color. But you're not supposed to wash them. And then with blending brushes, I don't wash them because I don't have time for that. So I have separate sets. That said, do what works for you. But I was waiting to get a second set because I used my first set the minute it got here. I was like playing with them and I was using them with dye inks. So they're already dedicated to that. So now that I got this set, I was like, oxides, here we go. And yeah, do you need both? Again, personal preference. I'm gonna switch back and forth. It just depends on what I'm doing. For these, I used it in a couple different ways. I used them to apply ink directly to cardstock, like a die cut. And I also use them in this video to apply ink to a background stamp. And the smaller size was nice because I was able to get, narrower strips of ink. So I got the whole rainbow onto one background, which I'll show in the video. So that's kind of the bonus of something like this, is just the smaller size means more colors in less area is the easiest way for me to explain it. So I think that's all I have to say. Keep watching and I'll show you guys how I made these cards. So I started off with the Picket Fence Birthday Dance Confetti background stamp. And this is a clear photopolymer stamp. And usually, regardless of the type, with background stamps, I just put them face up on my desk, press my cardstock into it after I ink it up. However, I want to stamp this over and over and over again. So I put it in my MISTI, and then I have just a square of white cardstock in my MISTI. And then I pulled out the little pint-sized pouncers that I want to use because I'm going to do a rainbow of colors. So I got everything ready to go. And then I'm working with Distress Oxides. And I have shown this technique on my YouTube channel several times in several different ways over the years. But my preferred way of doing this is definitely with oxide inks or like a pigment ink. Mostly because those just, take longer to dry. So, you've got a little more wiggle room. They sit on top of the stamp and the cardstock a bit more. But you can do this with all sorts of inks. You would just kind of have to experiment. So applying the ink with the little pint-sized pouncers means I'm able to apply like these more narrow sort of strips of ink so I can get all the colors on this stamp. I've done it in the past with just like using like kind of the edge of the ink pad. That does work. It's a little more finicky and it's a little harder to kind of get that blend. So that's where something like these little sponges just takes care of that for me. And I always start, if I'm doing a rainbow of colors, I always start with yellow. One, because it's kind of in the center of the little rainbow of colors. So then that gives me also a visual. It's like, okay, if I just kind of start in sort of in the middle, we can work our way out on either side and, everything's going to fit. And also because yellow being the lightest color, this keeps my yellow, paper pouncer, my yellow ink pad from picking up all the other colors, whereas all the other colors are kind of fine if they do pick up a little bit of the, colors beside them, if that makes sense. So I use the little pint-sized pouncers to apply the ink to the stamp, as you could see. And that was why I had it in my MISTI, because I was, opening it and stamping it over and over again to get all those colors. You could technically add all the colors at once and then stamp it once, but I would rather not. I find it easier to just do as I did and showed and just do like one color at a time. Kind of keeps things from getting really messy and from really getting like all the colors like all over my little pouncer sponges. And then before I cleaned the stamp, I took my card base and I put some little post-it tape where the score line was, and I just pressed it onto the stamp and got basically like a second generation of that ink onto what will be the inside of the card. So I got a bit of that color, a bit of the pattern. Doesn't need to be perfect. And then I cleaned the stamp off and I inked it up with clear embossing ink. Now, Oxide inks do take longer to dry. You can heat emboss with them. However, in the time it actually took to ink everything up, etc., I didn't want to risk just trying to pour embossing powder over it and maybe like the yellow and the orange would have been dry already, So I cleaned the stamp off, and that's the magic of having a stamp platform, is I was able to ink it up with clear embossing ink, stamp it directly on top, and then I coated it with a sparkly embossing powder. So poured that all over the background, tapped off the excess, and then I'm going to melt this with my heat tool, and then it's going to be sparkly rainbow confetti. Like just pure perfection, honestly. We could just call it a day here. Like, this was a really fun little background to make. So I just went through with my heat tool and made sure to get everything melted till it was all like clear, glittery, shiny goodness. And I'll tilt it back and forth in the light too to show it off, because it is just fun. So after I had everything melted, it's always a good idea to funnel that embossing powder back into the container and put the lid on so that, I don't knock it over, because I've done that many, many times. So yeah. It's shiny, sparkly rainbow goodness. So I'm going to get that embossing powder, put the lid on, get that out of the way so I don't make a mess. And then I'm going to trim this panel down to just slightly smaller than an A2 card. So I just used my guillotine trimmer and just started kind of taking bits off the edge. I wanted to make sure that I had all the colors on the panel. So I just kind of kept rotating it until I was happy with it and just trimmed it all down. And then for my little main image, I'm using one of the cake stand images from the sugar and calorie free stamp set. So I've got another piece of smooth white cardstock, and I'm inking up the stamp with some intense black ink, which is just an alcohol marker friendly ink. So stamping that onto the cardstock, and then to color that in, I'm just using my Spectrum Noir tri-blend markers. Copics would work great, Olo markers, anything really. Sky's the limit. But I was in the mood to use my tri-blends this time, so that's what I pulled out. And of course I did a rainbow of colors. The image has an actual rainbow on it. But there was a method to my madness with this little rainbow image, because I couldn't fit all the colors onto there. So I omitted the yellow and the blue, because there's going to be all these other little parts of this little cake image that's going to have those two colors. So I just took those off and used them for everything else. So, and like I always do, I work darkest to lightest. It's a somewhat laziness thing, and also I've just been coloring for so many years that it's a laziness thing. If you're newer to alcohol markers, I highly recommend. There's so many resources out there, but one of the big things is working from lightest to darkest. It gives you a lot more control, and especially when you're learning and figuring out, blending and all the things. But once you get comfortable with it, you can kind of do whatever works for you. And what works for me is darkest to lightest. So that's what I did, and just colored in all the different little parts of this cake. And then I used really pale sort of blue turquoise colors on the little cloud image, and then used it's the True Blue blend, has this almost like a colorless blender, really. It's so pale. So I used that to kind of blend those out a little bit more on the clouds. And then at this point I decided, I was like, ooh, that icing along the bottom of the cake, it's in rainbow colors, of course. So I just went through and colored in every single one of those with just the exact same markers that I was using. So just kind of, this took actually not very long because it was more like dabbing the markers because they're just little, little dots really. So went through, added all the colors, and then decided like the one part of the base is going to be purple, and then the cake stand itself, I decided to just go in with lighter grays. So pulled out a few of those. Once I have everything colored, I'm going to add shimmer. So I just used one of my Nouveau Aqua Shimmer pens, and I'm going to add that. It doesn't really look like much on camera because the light isn't hitting it, but I'll try and kind of show at the end with my little flashlight to kind of show the sparkle. So I paint this on, let it dry. I added in like a second or a third coat to really just amp up the little sparkly bits. Once this was dry, which doesn't take very long, I went in with my white gel pen. You always want to add shimmer, glossy accents, etc. first if you're planning on adding white gel pen highlights, because the shimmer pens and the glossy accents will dissolve white gel pen. So I did the shimmer first and then went in with the white gel pen and just added little highlights here and there, little dots here and there for texture, just to give it all that little extra something. So once I had that done, I fussy cut this. I don't have the coordinating die set, so I just fussy cut it, but there is a coordinating die set for this, so I'll just have a link to that in the supplies. And then for my sentiment for the first card, and I'm going to use it as a companion sentiment on the next card I make, I'm just using the happy birthday sentiment from the little animal crackers, a little note set. It's so cute. But I just used just the sentiment for this time. And black cardstock in my MISTI. I use my anti-static powder tool for this. That just keeps the embossing powder from clinging to anything other than the stamped image. And then I stamped the sentiment with just some clear embossing ink, coated it with some detail white embossing powder, tapped off the excess, melt that with my heat tool, and then give that a few seconds to cool down. And then I'll remove the excess anti-static powder with one of my microfiber cloths. And then I'm going to die cut the sentiment with the coordinating wafer die. And I'm just going to tape it into place with little bits of washi tape so that it doesn't shift when I run it through my die cut machine. And then I'm going to die cut these sentiments. And then once these are die cut, I can start assembling this first card. And I'm going to add some black baker's twine, just for fun. So wrap that around my card front a few times, and then using my reverse tweezers to hold that little knot in place, I can then tie my little bow. So get that tied, get everything the way I want it, remove the tweezers, tighten the bow, trim off the excess. And then I had cut some more black cardstock to just slightly bigger than this panel, so it'll just, mat it, frame it up a little nicely. So craft tacky glue on the back of that, adhered those together. Zhuzhed it a few times to get it straight. That's why I personally prefer liquid adhesive, because yeah, it gives me wiggle room, literally. And then on the back of my little cake, I just put some little foam squares, pop that into place, and then I'm going to do the same thing with the sentiment. So I'm going to pop that on with some foam squares, and then adhere that to my card base that I had pressed the background into earlier. So the inside's got the little confetti rainbow colors, just in a paler version so that it's easy to write over. So I got that adhered to the card base, and then as my final little embellishment, I'm using some little black and white clay hearts from the from Picket Fence's Neutral Hearts like shaker collection. So I adhered a few of those into place, and then while I was like finishing up that card, my brain's going, and I was like thinking. So I took the Hooray word die and die cut that from some smooth white cardstock, and then I just stuck it to a paper inking palette just to hold it in place. I'm going to use the exact same colors, my little mini Pouncers, and I'm going to make this die cut rainbow in basically the exact same way I used it on the background stamp. And if I'd wanted to, you could do the same thing to that background stamp, and instead of stamping it onto just a panel of cardstock, you could stamp it onto something that's like a large die cut. That would look really fun too. Like, just I need more hours in the day to do all the things that like start popping up in my head. it's kind of like, what if I did this? What if I did that? As always, the options are endless. So I started again with the yellow because that's just the habit I've just made for myself, whether it's necessary or not. Sometimes when I'm doing rainbow stuff, I almost always start with the yellow. So I did also on an angle because that's just fun, and used all the same colors. I'll have links to all the colors I used, but this is again kind of my go-to rainbow palette when it comes to distress colors, and that's Picked Raspberry, Carved Pumpkin, Mustard Seed, Mermaid Lagoon, Mowed Lawn, and Wilted Violet. So went through, pounced that onto this background, and then removed it from the paper inking palette, cleaned this off, and again, oxides dry slowly. You can heat emboss with them. However, these are oxides, and I think you can kind of even see it here on the video. This is going to get a little more intense because if you like spray it with water or add anything sort of water reactive, it makes the colors more intense. So I mushed my clear embossing ink just onto my work surface, and I'm using one of the white pint-sized paper pouncers. And I did all that separately like that because I didn't want to risk picking up any of the color from the background, because again, oxide inks are water reactive, and I didn't want to like contaminate my clear ink pad. So that's why I was doing it specifically like that, just to keep my ink pad. I don't like getting it all contaminated in case I want to do like watermark stamping, things like that. So that works. However, you can also just press your watermark ink pad or like your clear embossing ink pad onto your die cut before adding it. But again, I like using the pouncers for it because one, I get more even coverage, and two, it kind of avoids getting it on my fingers, if that makes sense. I don't mind getting ink and stuff on me, but anything somewhat sticky, which clear embossing ink is sticky, drives me insane. So having little tools to, apply it and, keep it from as much from getting on my fingers as possible, I'm fine with. Every other texture doesn't bother me. Like the embossing powder, glitter, that kind of stuff doesn't faze me. But if it's sticky, it drives me nuts. Anywho, after I'd done that, I coated this with that same sparkly embossing powder and then melted it with my heat tool. And so fun. So fun. So now I need to create a background for this card. Could have used the same background stamp. That would have worked amazingly as well. But I wanted to use this confetti stencil set. Is that what it's called? I'm like looking. Sprinkles. It's called Sprinkles, not confetti. Sprinkles 6x8 layering stencil set. This has 5 layers to it. And I just put a panel of A2 size cardstock. I could have done this directly onto the card base and like kept it one layer. However, I want to add twine again. Plus, and someone asked me this recently, like why I do things like separately and then glue it to a card. I'm clumsy, for one. That's generally why. I make a mess. It just is what it is. So if I was doing this all on the card base, 9 times out of 10, I'm going to end up accidentally wrecking it. It's rare. Like I literally get stressed if I'm working directly on my card. So even if I'm adhering that, which is what I'm going to do, I'm going to adhere this directly to the card base. I prefer working separately and then adhering it afterwards. So anywho, worked my way through all the stencils, but we're missing purple because there's only 5 stencils, but I'm going to address that. But before I do, so I stenciled that background with those stencils, same colors, same pouncers, everything. And then I have the inside of my second card base, again, Post-it tape, stuck it to my paper inking palette, and using all those stencils again. But this time I am not re-inking anything. I'm not using the ink pads at all. I'm just kind of swirling what is left on the stencil and whatever's left on the pint-sized paper pouncer, say that 3 times fast, sponges. So I'm getting, again, a much fainter, and I'm using lighter pressure as well. So that it's fainter than how it looks on the card front. And that's what I want, because on the insides of my cards, I don't want it super intense. I want it to be able to be written over. So after I did that, I went back to the card front and I took it doesn't matter what stencil. I just took the one I used the pink on, cleaned it off, and then just shifted the stencil, as you could see, and then added the wilted violet, and then repeated that onto the inside of the card. So now I've got all the colors with all these little sprinkles. And again, this just makes me happy because I love sprinkles. Literally. like the amount of sprinkles I have in my house, it's kind of ridiculous. But I like them. I love sprinkles. Like putting them on a little bit of ice cream, sprinkling them on like some Rice Krispie squares, like those sorts of things. It's like, how can you not just love sprinkles? They're cute and they're fabulous. Anyway, I got a bunch of black cardstock for that die cut sentiment. I normally don't stack this many layers together. You know, I usually find like 3 is enough. That's more than enough, especially with heavyweight cardstock like this. But I did extra. I was being extra, but also I did extra to like, because this sentiment is the focus. So I wanted to pop it up even more. So I stacked all those layers together. And then on this one as well, I added some baker's twine and wrapped it around, used my reverse tweezers, tied it in a bow, got that the way I wanted it. And then after zhuzhing that one up into the way I wanted, I'm going to adhere this directly to my card base that is nice and clean and not ruined. So I'm going to adhere that down and then adhere the die cut sentiment right on top. And then this is why I had heat embossed that second little happy birthday sentiment there. So I can add that to this card as well. And yeah, just going to use a little foam square, a little bit of adhesive, adhere that into place. And then I did end up actually adding a few of those little clay hearts to this one as well, just because you can't go wrong with a few little hearts. So stuck those into place and that finished off both of these cards. So I'll turn my flashlight on to kind of try and show a bit of the sparkle from the Aqua Shimmer pen. And yeah, that's it for the moment. I will have links below the video to all of the supplies used, etc. You can just expand the description box below the video and check that out if you are interested. It's all going to be listed there and linked for your convenience. Thank you all so much for watching, subscribing, thumbs upping, commenting, all the good things. I very much appreciate it. And I will see you all very soon in another video. Bye.